Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today here over your lunch hour. I'm Stephen Floyd with Producer Ag, and we have Brian Bledsoe here with us for our virtual weather meeting. Um, and Brian's going to bring us some insight to our current weather pattern and what maybe we can expect coming up, maybe some volatility and some drastic temperature changes. Just want to remind everyone that this is a live event and there's a chat feature to where you can type your questions into the chat, and then we can post those to Brian as we move through our meeting here. So, Brian, I know there's a lot of information to cover. So with that, I'm going to just go ahead and turn it over to you, and you can get us up to speed on what's happening with the weather.
All right, thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. And obviously, a couple of points that I think really need to be mentioned and, if nothing else, adhered to over the next, really several days and even next few weeks or so. And I know they're simple, but I want to reiterate them. And because we are entering a period of the year with thunderstorm season, all right, the day-to-day forecast is going to be highly changeable given the pattern. And by that, I'm saying today's thunderstorm events a lot of times will determine the outcome of tomorrow and the next day's thunderstorm events. And I know a lot of you are familiar with that, but I think it is an important point that needs reiterated. And right now, the models are not very consistent with those finer and more important details. So you're going to see a lot of volatility if you're using a weather app on your phone or whatever, or if you're looking at stuff online. Just know that there's going to be plenty of volatility in the forecast. So it's very important that you stay current with that. Now, I send out a lot of information every single day. I send out 2 emails in the morning. I send out a longer form video during the course of the afternoon. So if you're interested in receiving that information and you don't already receive it, be sure to hit up Steve and he'll put you on the list so you can get that. The other point, and I know it just kind of goes without saying right now because of the world that we're in, but you need to be careful what kind of material you're consuming on the internet or social media when it comes to weather. Most of it is designed to farm your engagement, and it is not designed for accuracy or accuracy for decision-making purposes. So I think that a lot of you already know this stuff. I know it's common sense, but I see stuff shotgunned all over the internet every single day that leads a lot of folks down a different path that they may not want to go when it comes to weather information. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and talk about what's happened over the past 30 days. And there have been some haves across parts of Kansas, but unfortunately, there's been mostly just have-nots associated with this right here and also this right here. All right. Now, the northwest corner of Kansas, up around St. Francis, had very good rain out of this deal. That's 136% of average for that month. That might be one of the wettest 30-day periods for Cheyenne County, Kansas, up there in St. Francis in recent memory because they actually were able to score some water. We also have this little triangle here across east central and southeast Kansas, but for the most part, we need some water. All right. And we've got to get moisture far enough west to brew thunderstorms here in Colorado and western Kansas so they can make their way eastward. And we've just not been very effective at accomplishing that so far this spring. So the next 10 days are going to be fairly extreme. Obviously, we're dealing with the hot, windy weather that we have right now. This is a temperature anomaly forecast, and I don't have the freshest European model information. It comes out here in about an hour and a half or so, but this will probably get it done as far as what the trend is concerned. This is where obviously the heat is going to take place from today through the next, say at least 4 days. Some of these temperature anomalies are almost 17 degrees above what they should be for this time of year. Obviously, the drought is helping to fuel that. Now, if we look at the precipitation anomalies for that same 5-day period from today right through the 19th, you can see that we're mainly dry. I didn't say completely dry, but I did say mainly dry or drier than average. And I would say especially west of that line. Areas farther east, you're going to get in on some spotty thunderstorm development this upcoming weekend. If you get one of those storms, you're probably going to get some good water, but you're also probably going to get some hail and maybe high wind and maybe even some tornadic activity within this pattern over the next 5 days or so. The main area of wetter than average weather is going to be positioned up here across western Nebraska, southeast Wyoming, far northern Colorado, and then obviously a little farther east into parts of the Corn Belt. Now, the 5-day period that follows that is going to be radically different. That's the temperature trend from the 19th through the 24th. All right. And that cold front that comes through early next week is going to mean business. In fact, we could even have some frost concerns up here again across southeast Wyoming, western Nebraska, northeast Colorado. I don't think they come into northwest Kansas. I think they stay a little bit farther to the northwest. But this is a testament to that extreme pattern that we're going to be dealing with, where we're going to such hot, dry, windy weather, this week, to something that is quite a bit different coming up for next week. And there will be better rain chances for some areas. Now, I still think this area that I'm highlighting up here probably ends up drier than average for that 5-day period, again, from the 19th through the 24th. But there are some areas down here to the south and southwest, eastern New Mexico, West Texas, Oklahoma. In fact, all of Texas and most Oklahoma is going to be wetter than average. And that's because we are finally getting moisture to come farther west out of the Gulf to brew some storm chances back here to the west that can inevitably move their way eastward. I know this is far from a perfect or ideal pattern, all right, but it is definitely better than what we are looking at right now. And as typically the case with everything, there's going to be some haves and have-nots, but I would say based on current model data, if you are south of that line, you've got a better shot to get some water than maybe areas up here to the north and to the northeast where you're seeing those drier pockets. It's a pattern that I've been watching for quite a while, and I think it, at least needs to be talked about. And that kind of piggybacks on to what this next set of maps is that I'm going to show you. This is a European extended model that measures the vertical motion in the atmosphere through June. It's a little more complicated than that, but essentially that's what it is. So what I want you to notice here, and this is a global shot, where you're seeing the greens, that's where you have rising motion in the atmosphere prevailing. And that means you're going to brew clouds, you're going to brew showers, thunderstorms, and obviously rain. Where you're seeing the browns, that's where you have sinking air in the atmosphere. And it's the complete opposite. I've got a 7-day running scale here, all right, that starts today and goes through the 21st. And then we'll move on to the next 7 days. So what you're going to see is this animation take us through from now right through the end of June. And I want you to watch what happens in this part of the map as I do so. All right. Do you see all of the green advancing and holding here from the eastern Pacific Ocean into the western half of the United States? That is the atmosphere and the ocean coupling or talking to each other with the El Nino event that's taking place. So as we finish May and roll into June, that's where our best vertical motion is going to be located in the atmosphere here across the Eastern Pacific and in across parts of North America. Now, while that is happening, look at what happens over here. India, Eastern Africa, Australia, Indonesia, China. Watch how all of that changes, and we see a lot of sinking air. This is very typical for a developing and strengthening El Nino signature right here, that one area lights up and the other area doesn't. Now, I want to be real clear about this. Does this feature mean that we've got to have just a rock star back-to-back, day after day, week after week rain events? No, it doesn't. The finer, more important details will resolve that. But this feature, the fact that we are going to have better moisture chances, we are going to have rising motion in the atmosphere, it's a full-on pattern change that, if nothing else, gives some of us a fighting chance as we finish May and we go into June. And I was talking to Steve about this before we started, and I think the entire summer, for the most part, hinges on June, in my opinion. Actually, the last part of May and into June, because if we continue to perpetuate this dryness, I'm not sure we can reverse it in time for anything at that point, because after June, summer starts to set in more, where our storm systems become fewer and farther between, and that's when we can get into real trouble. And you might say, well, Brian, we're already in a mess of trouble. And you're absolutely right, we are. But we have a lot of drought over a wide area to fix, and it's never going to get fixed all at once. It has to be chipped away. So if there's one piece of optimism that I would share with you, it's the pattern change right here that inevitably leads to at least some better and more meaningful rain chances by way of having moisture in place and also having some rising motion in place. And the current state of the oceans, let's look at that. This is where they were January 1st. Okay, so obviously you had the La Nina going on right here across the equatorial Pacific. You've had the Indian Ocean starting to warm up. You had a little bit of cooler water up here across parts of the North Atlantic, a little cool pocket there, but overall, a lot of warmth in the Pacific. This is where we are now. Do you see how things changed? Yeah, changed a lot. We continued to warm up the Indian Ocean. We really haven't expanded this cool water up here in the Bering Sea or the Gulf of Alaska, and we remain a lot warmer than average in that sector as well as across the ENSO field. We've also continued to cool off the North Atlantic. And I've said this a lot of times, that a lot of times when the North Atlantic is cooler, excuse me, and the Pacific is warmer, a lot of times we don't have to worry about moisture in the middle part of the country. A lot of times it takes care of itself. Now, it doesn't mean it's great for everybody. It never is. But at least it gives us a chance to start reversing the pattern that got us here. But that's a pretty big change. There's January 1st, and then there's where we are right now. That is one of the fastest changes I can ever remember down here in the ENSO region, where we rapidly ended the La Nina and went into full El Nino mode, where we are right now. This is a different way to look at that. Up here on the smaller rectangle, you've got Indonesia over here, west coast of South America over here, and these are the sea surface temperature anomalies up here, all right? This bottom kind of rectangular box, that's what's going on beneath the surface. And I really want to draw your attention to this area right here. These ocean temperatures are running anywhere from 5 to 8 degrees Celsius warmer than average. This is the strongest subsurface El Nino signal that I've ever seen. And this water, in part, still has to rise to the surface, not to the magnitude it is down here between 100 and 200 meters, but that water rising to the surface continues to warm the surface, and it continues to deepen that coupling of the atmosphere and the ocean. So we are in El Nino right now, and we are only going to strengthen this event. And that is a really strong signal for continuing to strengthen this event. And you can see if we just put that on a graph, all right, back here around mid-February, you can see we are sea surface temperature anomaly right there in the ENSO region was about at a negative 0.2. We are already approaching 1.2. We've essentially warmed that region almost 1.5 degrees Celsius over such a short period of time. And I don't see that slowing down with what I just showed you, what's going on beneath the surface. The computer models don't see it slowing down either. This is the European seasonal model. And again, I'm not terribly focused on what's happening out here in the outer periods. I'm focused on what's happening from May right through July. The tighter those lines are packed together, the more confidence the model has in achieving it. And by July, this model, even just the mean, takes us into strong El Nino territory. What happens after that, I still think is somewhat up for debate. I think El Nino is here. I think it's here to stay for a while. It's just a matter of how strong it gets. Some of these members of this model have us up here at a record-setting El Nino. Anything that's basically above about 3 degrees Celsius would be considered record-setting El Nino. And you see about half of those model members are above it. There's another half that's down here, but even the weakest member takes us above 2 degrees Celsius, which would be very strong as far as El Nino is concerned. So even if we don't, achieve the hype that you're seeing online or social media about the strongest El Nino ever, whatever, the measured approach to this is, yes, it's going to be a very strong El Nino. It does have potential to be a record setter. And the Bureau of Meteorology out of Australia also reflects that same thing. In fact, by October, it's got us up here at about 2.7 degrees Celsius. That would be a very strong, almost record-setting El Nino. But you can also see as we skate through the summer, we still rapidly achieve that 1.5 to 2 degrees threshold over here, which is important. This is putting that on a map. These are the sea surface temperature anomalies forecast from this month right through November. And you can see the real story here is this whole body of water continues to be a lot warmer than average here. And where that warmth sets up is key. And you see some of those deeper oranges and reds setting up right over here, all right, right in that quadrant. And historically speaking, if that happens, we a lot of times do not have to worry about the extension, the maintenance, or development of drought. And I've said this many, many times that only a fool forecasts rain in a drought. And I know you're familiar with that saying, but at some point, something has to give here. There's too much changing in the atmosphere from the pattern that got us here to this pattern, which historically doesn't keep us here. And this doesn't happen overnight, but those are the changes that are going to take place. So the qualifier here, when we look at these seasonal models, is they're not the end all be all with the forecast. They have their own ideas here. And some of them lean very heavily on persistence, meaning if the forecast initializes when it's dry, that the model carries that dry flavor through the forecast. However, I think you'll see some interesting things here, at least from a temperature standpoint. We'll look at that from the European seasonal model. This will be June through November. You don't see a lot of heat in this sector here. In fact, where you see the light white shading, it's average to 1.5 degrees below average. And where you're seeing some blue, that's down here at 0.5 degree to 1 degree below average here. And you might be saying, well, the eastern half of Kansas is warmer. As I said, if we can shove plenty of water in the ground in June, I think that temperature anomaly has a shot to be grossly overdone. July, we're still coolest out west, warmest farther east. And typically with an El Nino coming on, if we're going to see some heat build, this is usually where it will build in that area that I've highlighted right there. August, you see it? Right there. September, October, it relaxes a lot. And November, even more so. And this is a very classic El Nino look where we are a lot warmer than average, southern Canada and across the northern tier, and we were average to cooler than average the farther south you go because our subtropical jet stream is roaring, more clouds, more moisture, so on and so forth. Let's look at the precipitation anomaly forecast. Again, June to November. This is its June forecast. That's a lot of a wetter than average signal over the middle part of the country. Okay. And I think that's a testament to the changes that are taking place in the Pacific. It's not just wet in the central part of the country, it's wet out west too. Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado. That means we've got moisture doing this, and we've got moisture doing this, working kind of in tandem right there. So if we are able to do a lot of good here with the moisture in June, a lot of times that will beat back some of the heat that takes place later on. July still looks largely wetter than average for most of Kansas. The southeast corner, as I'd mentioned, do you see this little corridor right here? Okay. That corridor, especially east and southeast Texas, eastern Oklahoma, Louisiana, up here in the far southeast Kansas, those areas tend to dry a little bit when we have El Nino like this in the middle of the summer. But the European seasonal model has a lot of that moisture coming out of the southwest on up in and moving across Kansas with the monsoonal flow. August dries out here. Not out of the question for that to happen, obviously, because sometimes that can happen in El Ninos when we get them in the summer. September goes right back to the wetter pattern. October, same story. November, even more so, while we dry things out up there. So the driest and the hottest month out of this whole European model forecast, I think, is really August. That'd be the red flag that stands out, would be August to me in this model. Let's look at the Canadian seasonal model. And you're going to see a couple of different things here in the temperature forecast from the Canadian model. You're going to see this. This feature has been existing in this model forecast since January. And that is a cooler than average signal. And I think it's owes to the fact that this model has been producing very wet conditions in here. And I will talk more about that in a second. But the main heat signal with the Canadian model focuses out farther to the west and northwest. July, you've got the same feature where we are cooler here, a lot warmer up there. August, it's still present. September, it weakens a little bit and shifts. We're hotter out west. October, even more so. And November, that's where it stays. So is it possible the Canadian model is overdone with that cool air in the middle part of the country? Is it possible that the model is ignoring the fact that the soil is dry and will heat up more? Sure, it is. All right. But the European model for at least half of Kansas was kind of on board with that, the western half. So I don't want to completely dismiss it. Again, a lot of what we see going forward this summer hinges as we wrap up May and go into June. The precipitation anomaly forecast from the Canadian. Here's your June forecast, and again, shows a lot wetter than average in the middle part of the country, and you're drier up here over the top. July, still no huge dry signal. You're drier up here to the north. August, no huge dry signal. In fact, it's the opposite in places. September, we beat it back a little bit. October, you can clearly see where the subtropical jet stream is active. And November, pretty much the same story, where you are drier up here, you're drier up here, all right? And you would largely be wetter down here to the south, with Kansas largely being in the middle. The NMME seasonal model, temperature forecast, June and November. I don't worry too much about the first two shades here of kind of tannish and yellow. I worry more about where these darker oranges set up, okay? So you can see where they're most prevalent. The farther north you go, the farther south you go, it's the opposite. So that's June. There's July. So you see some heat setting up here. August, again, favors the eastern half of Kansas. September, we weaken that signal a bit. October, your main heat is out west. And November, your main heat is up here, just like the Euro showed. Is the NMME model usually too warm? It is. I have rarely ever seen it paint widespread average to cooler than average conditions. I think it's a flaw with the model. That's why I only look for some of those darker shades, because I think they do a better job of telling the story. If we look at the precipitation anomaly forecast, right,
Hey,
here's
Brian.
June. Yes.
Real quick, since we're wrapping up the temperature there was a question that came into the chat as we were talking about the above average temperature anomalies, I think mainly in July, August.
Yes.
The question was, when was the last time it was over 3 degrees above normal?
You mean as far as the model forecast?
The model forecast or a comparable year,
23.
23.
Yep.
Okay.
Which again was the last year that we came out of La Nina and went into a stronger El Nino. So there's some signatures there within the modeling, but also historically that favors that, southeast Nebraska, eastern third or eastern half of Kansas, down into eastern Oklahoma and down into Texas, where you get a better heat signal with the developing El Nino, especially the stronger the El Nino. Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Thank you.
So if we look at the precipitation anomaly forecast here, here's June from the NMME. No huge dry signal here. In fact, we've got good moisture coming up out here west. We would be average to above average, I think, for most of Kansas. A little drier here just to the east. In July, we'd show us first tier dry signal here. Nothing huge. If we are able to shove water in the ground out here west, we would be able to fight some of that July off with that. But you see there's a little bit more stout dry signal down here than there is farther north. August, you can kind of see it goes away. This does not go away. September, a lot of moisture coming up here with the monsoonal flow and probably some tropical activity that's coming out of the West Pacific or the Eastern Pacific. The tropical hurricane season in the Eastern Pacific should be very, very active this year. But you can see in September, no huge dry signal here. October, same story. A lot of action the farther south you go. And November, wetter than average here. And I know that's a long ways out there, okay? But your better dry signal favors the Pacific Northwest, Northern Rockies. This is the Copernicus 3 model. It's a model suite. It's not just one thing. It's a suite that's looking June through October. Here's your temperature anomalies, all right? Again, those first two tiers I don't get too shook about. I focused mainly on here. And I know the map doesn't have the states on it, but you can get it. With Kansas here in the center part of it, we're basically a tick above average with the model, all right? There's July, a little warmer, but we are not in that darker orange or red shade. It is still mainly west and northwest or farther south. Now, when we go into August, we see that heat build a little bit here, okay? Especially in that sector and then farther west. Not a lot of heat showing up here in the Midwest, right next to us. September, we beat that signal back. October, even more so. In fact, one could argue we're cooler than average here in the middle part of the country by October. Okay. Precipitation-wise, here's your June forecast, wetter than average. July, we see that go away a little bit, and we bring in some dryness here where I talked about it likely to prevail. East and southeast Texas, east and southeast Oklahoma, maybe nosing its way up into parts of southern Missouri, but we are wetter out west. August, we see that build a little bit more, okay? Across Texas, Oklahoma, probably up into southern and southeast Kansas. We are wetter out west. September, it goes away. And October, for sure. A lot of this stuff is also built into what is most likely to happen during a strong El Nino. We call that climatology. So a lot of times the models will look at that, and if they see that El Nino signal, they build that into their forecast. And that's some of what we might be seeing here too. We look at the analog years, both temperature and precipitation, or actually we're just going to look at the precip here, all right, for June. These are your analog years. They haven't changed a great deal. They're pretty much the same, but for June, a lot of Kansas shows up in those years being wetter than average. But notice where the main wet signal is. It's in the western half of the state. A little bit of dryness here in parts of the Corn Belt. We'll have to see how that plays out. But certainly, the farther west and northwest you go, that's where your wetter signal is. July, there's your temperature anomaly out here. Look at this. Look how cool that is. July here in Kansas, cooler. Precipitation-wise, we are a little drier than we were before, all right? So it's kind of checkerboarded, but look who really starts to dry out, right where the modeling kind of said it's most likely, all right, so historically. So does everything fall apart? If we have a wet June, does everything fall apart as we go into July? Not necessarily, all right? Because remember, we have all of that forcing, all of that lift in the atmosphere that's going to be present across the western part of the country here. So I think that's another reason that the farther west and northwest you go, that's where you kind of see those wetter signals prevailing. If we go into August, temperature-wise, average to even a little cooler than average historically with all of those years. I know it's hard to believe based on what we're dealing with right now, but I think it owes to the pattern being wetter during all of those years. And if we look at the precipitation anomalies, this is where you start to dry things out, okay? Again, eastern Kansas especially, Oklahoma, Texas, and down along the Gulf Coast, and we are wetter out here across the west. We're also wetter just to the east here in the Corn Belt too. September temperatures, cooler up here, warmer here. Precipitation-wise, we bring some of that moisture back, just like the model said. A little bit drier, though, through this sector, through Texas. October, we are warmer up over the top. We are cooler beneath, where that strong subtropical jet stream is going to be going. Precipitation-wise, historically, drier, pretty much east of that line, wetter farther west. And if we go to November, cooler across the board and generally average with a tick above average through that sector there. Okay. So there are some challenges going forward. I mean, we all know that. And the main challenge right now is to be able to beat some of this dryness and drought back with this pattern flip the last 10 days of May and as we go into June. And I will double down on what I said earlier. If we are not effective at doing that, that's what's really going to be a problem for the remainder of the summer. There's a lot of evidence that shows that we should be able to mitigate this in June. I'm just really worried that it's going to come with a whole set of extremes. And by extremes, I mean, a lot more rain in a short period of time than what you want. I think it will come with increased severe thunderstorm chances by way of hail, high wind, and also, tornadic development. And you might say, well, how can you say that based on what we're dealing with right now? Well, if you go back and look at history, when patterns like this break, and you've talked to old timers at length, and I do a lot of that as a historian, they always say your drought breaks with flood. And it's because we see these massive regime changes in the things that drive our seasonal weather. And one of those massive regime changes is the ocean and the atmosphere really starting to talk the last 10 days of May and as we go through June. So do we have failure modes here that we just don't see any rain and we go through? I suppose we could. One of those failure modes is right now is our lack of good soil moisture. But even in some of the worst years, when we break this pattern, we usually break it with some pretty significant rain. Like I said, I'm just worried it's going to be more extreme because we're in an extreme pattern right now. You don't need me to tell you that.
Yeah, yeah. You kind of had just answered one of the first questions here, wrapping up May into June. The models kind of indicate cooler and slightly wetter than average. And, what is your confidence level on that? But I think you just pretty much covered that just now. So,
Yeah, Steve, and I'm also in the camp too, knowing what I know, okay, because I look at this stuff in great detail every day. Knowing what I know, I have to separate that from also my common sense and my ag background, saying I'll believe it when I see it. You know what I
right.
mean? And I know that a lot of folks are in there right now because I'm with you. I'll believe it when I see that pattern finally start to change. And over the past, say, 2 days, really, and this is a material that I've been sending out to the guys that subscribe to it, is there's been a significant push in the modeling to push moisture into eastern New Mexico, into eastern Colorado. And by moisture, I don't mean necessarily rain. I just mean water in the air that can actually give any showers or storms that develop something to work with to produce some meaningful rainfall. And we haven't seen that so far this spring. And it hasn't had any staying power either. So if we can just get the weather pattern to do that, that's going to put us in a much better spot to, if nothing else, see some more frequent rain chances that actually involve thunderstorms that can produce some rain.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. So, next, just kind of visit the nearby here, starting today, moving through the weekend and next week. The storms that may come through, it sounds like they're going to be pretty volatile. Maybe some heavy winds and some hail are highly likely. Is that pretty much the case? And we got to watch it day by day.
We have to watch it day by day because with the energy that's going to produce this is going to be kind of stalled out, kind of sitting in one spot over the Intermountain West, and it's going to send ripples eastward. So if you live in far western Kansas, I'm not optimistic at all about moisture for you. I think it's going to be very closely tied to the dry line that exists eastward across Kansas. And if we can keep that dry line in one spot, the eastern half is going to, see more frequent chances of storms. If we get a big complex of storms that sends out a big outflow that shoves that dry line farther west, then those thunderstorm chances will move farther west. I just think it's going to have an eastward bias with the energy that's coming out this weekend. And yes, there will be some severe thunderstorm events in that as well, not just in Kansas, but also regionally.
Yeah, yeah. And kind of, we were visiting a little bit before about persistent ridge patterns in El Nino events and careful what you ask for type of scenarios with the haves and have-nots. What are some lookouts for producers and everyone for, possible changes in the patterns and possible improvements or, extended drought period?
You'll be able to see it, happen right away. And if for whatever reason we completely strike out here with these next 45 days, all right, or even next 30 days, we're going to know a lot in the next 30 days. If this pattern fails, then it's not going to be pretty the remainder of the summer. Does that mean everybody isn't pretty? not necessarily, but I think areas farther west have a better opportunity to score water the deeper we go in the summer than areas farther east. And in the springtime, it's kind of the opposite. You know, the farther east you go, you get better range opportunities, and the farther west you live, they're a little bit more fleeting. So I really think the next 2 to 4 weeks is definitely going to be a tell on what we're going to see. If we don't beat this drought back in a widespread manner, we're going to have problems. Do I think that the core of a heat ridge, okay, for a lack of a better term, sets up right on top of Kansas? Is there any history there to follow that that's a pattern that El Nino perpetuates? No, it's not. In fact, it's the complete opposite. That ridge a lot of times sets up farther south across Texas, which is why that dry and warm signal is a little bit more robust down there. And we get thunderstorm complexes that ride that ridge across the central and northern plains. That's more akin to what we should see with an El Nino. But I've said many times, every El Nino is different. And a lot of folks that are clamoring for an El Nino, always be careful what you wish for, because whether it's La Nina or it's El Nino, each one of those phenomena lock weather patterns into a particular regime. And they each have their own problems depending on what part of the country that you're in. So I want us to be very measured going forward with this and really focus on the next 2 to 4 weeks to see any meaningful change before we can go beyond that. I think that's important to be a little more short-sighted right now versus long view.
Awesome. Yep. This is kind of an interesting one. If you had to highlight one, maybe the biggest weather risk for Kansas farmers this summer, what would that be?
I think it has to be what we're staring at the face: drought.
Yep.
Okay. If on the other side of the coin, if you look at what history would suggest or modeling would suggest, it's just the extremes. Getting too much water in June and then no water in August. Loading things up with severe thunderstorms early, and then completely shutting things off with the drought later on. Historically, it's full of extremes. So whether that is drought, which it's just good common sense to say, look, if I was a betting man looking at what I have to look at right now, is all that drought in Kansas going to be gone by the end of the summer? I think that's a big ask. I'm more focused on it just simply being mitigated to where we can get in a position where we have some moisture to do some good with some of the crops that are out there. And let me tell you, it can always be worse. And if you need any evidence of that, I've got some folks you can talk to in eastern New Mexico and West Texas right now. So they're likely going to be one of the latter folks to see some meaningful rain. So we have to really babysit the next 2 to 4 weeks and see how this plays out, and that's going to be the tell.
Yep. Well, that looks like all the questions we have. Maybe the lookout is, as we break this pattern, if it turns wet, likelihood of some volatility, hail, wind, thunderstorms moving through. So keep that in mind. Also, just want to reiterate that Brian does send us a lot of weather data and information daily. So if anybody on the call would like access to that, please reach out to your reps at Producer Ag, and then our partners at MKC and Midwest Fertilizer as well. And we can forward some of that information on to you as we're looking at this day by day weather pattern change moving forward. So with that, Brian, again, thank you very much for your knowledge and your information, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Stay current with the forecast. It's going to be important.
Thank you.
You bet.